Welcome to the Leap Hour, where inspiring leadership meets real-world impact. Hosted by Steve Farber, acclaimed author of The Radical Leap, this show brings you face-to-face with visionary leaders who embody the art of leading with love, energy, audacity, and proof. In each episode, Steve dives deep into the journeys of remarkable individuals who've embraced extreme leadership to ignite change, spark innovation, and inspire others to greatness. These are the game changers, the risk takers, and the leaders who prove that heart and courage can change the world. This is the Leap Hour, and the conversation starts now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Leap Hour. I'm your host, Steve Farber, if that is not obvious by the caption and the intro that you just heard. Thank you for tuning in. This is the fifth episode in a series that'll be going on for at least several months. And the idea behind it is that my first book, first of five, The Radical Leap, came out 20 years ago this year, which means that this is the 20th anniversary of the first publication of my first book. And what has happened over these couple of decades, which is still a little bit odd to say out loud, that it's been that long. It's been quite extraordinary for me personally because of the amazing people that I've met as a result of writing the book. You know, I was surrounded by authors when I first wrote that book. My mentor, Tom Peters, was one of the greatest still is one of the greatest management thinkers of our day. You know, he wrote In Search of Excellence, Thriving on Chaos, Liberation Management, and a bunch of others. And Jim Kouzes, co-author with Barry Posner of The Leadership Challenge. These people were my mentors. I was in their orbit. So I was getting lots of advice from them and lots of encouragement for them about publishing my first book. And I remember them telling me the feeling that you get when you crack open that first case of books that comes to you from the publisher and what that feels like, or the first time you walk into bookstore. Remember those? The first time you walk into a bookstore and you see your book on the shelf and what that feels like. So I was hearing all these really cool, encouraging things as I was getting ready to launch myself as an author in this world. What none of them said was completely unexpected, was the friendships that I would make, the people that I would meet, the relationships that I would develop, because somebody picked up that book somewhere and read it and connected with it and reached out. And, none of these folks said to me, "You're going to make so many new friends." But here we are 20 years later, and that is exactly what has happened. So unintended, great consequence. So this series, I'm bringing on several of these folks who, in my estimation, are the embodiment of the radical leap: love, energy, audacity, and proof. Who have demonstrated their not only willingness, but more important, their ability to change the world around them for the better, whether it's capital W world or small w world, whether it's literally the whole wide world or the world of their customers and colleagues and community and friends and family. All of those qualify in my book, literally and figuratively, for extreme leadership. So my guest today is one of these folks. Steve Dealph is joining us now. I'll tell you just a little bit about Steve, and then of course we're going to pick his brain, and we're going to pick his heart. People say that sounds. I guess it doesn't sound any more bizarre than picking one's brain, but in any case, Steve is a brilliant consultant. He's worked with, he started out more or less early in his career in higher ed, worked a lot with in the Greek community with fraternities and sororities, helping young minds and hearts develop into leaders. He's had stints at Warner Brothers and at Disney, and as an independent consultant, he does great work with clients. And he is a living, breathing practitioner of the Radical Leap framework in so many ways. And I'm grateful that you're joining me today to have this conversation. Steve, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
So let's start with, I know I gave the kind of high level of your story, but let's start out with, if you think way back to your work in higher ed. And in the Greek community, what kind of roles did you play in that world?
Well, I think the expectation for me was probably different than what I wanted and made sure that I got out of it. And it was really why I enjoyed it and have made lasting relationships and friendships with my students. I mean, some of them, I was just a couple years older when I started. But the expectation, I think, from a university administration was that I keep these organizations in line. First and foremost, right? And I know a lot of people, when they think of fraternities and sororities, they have opinions of them. But for me, these were values-based, principle-based organizations. I had been a part of one, still am, and it stayed connected and got a lot out of it. And I wanted to help provide that. I grew a lot as a result of that experience, was challenged a lot, and provided amazing leadership experience. So I wanted to provide that, but that wasn't necessarily, I think the first thing was accountability and discipline even. And if I was going to have to do that, I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't just about following rules, because a lot of the rules don't necessarily make sense if you want to get right down to it. They're silly, and there's phone book pages of them, hundreds of pages. But I wanted to get people to aspire, to make sure their organizations were acting in the ways they said they were about. And that was the other thing that I saw, was that a lot of times you would bring, or people would be so happy because they would be in, they were elected president of the organization or president of the interfraternity council, all of the organizations. And within weeks, they were miserable because it had nothing to do with really leading and a lot more to do with bureaucracy. And
so what I'm hearing you say is the typical role, which you were hired for, a quote unquote typical role, is to make sure that that these kids don't get in trouble, and therefore that the university doesn't get in trouble as a result of what they do.
Yeah, I mean, risk management was pretty much the term. And I don't want to, I mean, certainly I was blessed to have great leaders and supervisors who encouraged me to do what I did. But I think the larger sort of environmental press for the person in my position was, you keep them in line.
Right. But you said, there's something that you said, it went by kind of fast. So I just want to just put a little bit of a spotlight on it. You said that you interpreted your job in part was to help them live up to the words and standards that they had themselves expressed.
Yeah. Right? I mean, one of my own experiences as an undergrad was when I was about to be hazed. And we had not had hazing in my organization. And I don't know what gave me the courage, but I really wanted that organization and the friends that I had made in it to be real. And I stood up to it, and come to find out, so did some other people. And that's a skill. I mean, it was it wasn't really, really bad hazing, but to me, it was not what we said we were going to do, and not why I joined. And you didn't get me to come this far and then pull this kind of stuff on me. And it helped me. That was a huge growing moment when you can do that with your peers. Right. When you're in these situations, that's why I think it's a great crucible for leadership. And I could tell you stories. Maybe we will. Some of those that I've remained in touch with that have gone on to do some really, really amazing things, and they will come back to their experiences as an undergrad. Yeah.
So you saw it as an opportunity to help them grow as leaders in that context, which is not the stereotype anyways. That's not usually why somebody will join a fraternity, but it would seem to me it is a reason that somebody would pursue a higher office in the fraternity or the Greek world.
Yeah.
And like you said, it was usually disappointing because it wasn't the leadership experience that they hoped to get, but you helped them to get that.
Right. And I would, I even found some of the more, when they were, I was just reminded recently, I had dinner with two of the students from my very first job at Longwood College, now Longwood University in Virginia, where they, I was reminded, Steve, you used to tell us this is all practice. It may feel like the most important thing in the world, but this is all practice. And what you do now is you're going to remember it and you're going to pull on it. So, I mean, I was providing proof before you would even introduce that to me. But I think, I don't want to draw the connections too soon, but I think that's why, I really resonated and you and I have really connected over this stuff. So yeah, it was not just about, hey, having a great undergrad experience, but about making a difference.
So let's explore that a little bit. You mentioned providing proof, which of course is the fourth element of that LEAP framework. And then I also want to use this as an opportunity to tell the story of how you and I first connected. Because I think there was a bit of Steve Dealph audacity in that as well, as I recall. I think you and I might have slightly different versions of what that story was, but I'm curious to hear what yours is. And as a preface to that, I just want to tell our listeners and our viewers that as you see on the screen, if you're watching this, it says download the audiobook for free at radicalleap.org. So one of the things that we're doing, pardon me, in the context of this series is we're giving away the audiobook of the Radical Leap for free. So please just go there and avail yourself of it. And I will read it to you personally read it to you in your ear. But anyway, so tell a little bit, because you first discovered the Radical Leap while you were in that higher ed world, right?
Yeah, I worked at 3 different universities with a period in between where I worked for an organization where my whole job was creating leadership development, doing consulting at universities and colleges, mostly with fraternities and sororities, but helping advise and counsel them on consult on, policies, culture issues for their systems. And one of my main jobs was creating a leadership institute, a 5-day leadership institute, developing the curriculum, training the facilitators, the whole process. And it was really the flagship program. I think it still is. And there was a lot of pressure to develop curriculum because inevitably whatever we would do over the course of a summer would go back and be matriculated back into all these different campuses. And so we constantly had to keep it fresh. But the big issue for me was I knew that these students were intelligent. They recognized some of the challenges that were in front of them. And so it wasn't intellect that was keeping them from acting. It was courage. And so I was reading, and this is how I tell the story. I've told it when we've done the workshop. I'm reading all these big, thick books and incredibly boring on emotional intelligence. Not that emotional intelligence is boring, but just there was just a lot of research, and I thought I had to do research around it. And I was traveling a lot, consulting. And I remember I'm at a little school in Florida, St. Leo College. And it was a quick flight. I was living in Indianapolis at the time. It wasn't too long of a flight. And I had seen your book. You talked about seeing your book in bookstores. I would see your book all the time in airport bookstores. But I got to be honest, there's a little guy riding a wave in a suit and he's carrying a briefcase and it was a pretty thin book. And so my thought was, it would catch my eye, but I'm like, that's not going to help me right now. And I was coming back from that trip and I literally bought the book because I'm like, I can expense this, and I'll tell you, I opened it up.
Well, that's why I wrote it. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I opened it up and I mentioned at the beginning, that it was heartbreaking for me to have students that would take on these roles and then, be miserable not too long into them. And that's pretty much how your book starts. About, do you wake up in the morning and are you excited about the day ahead of you, or do you feel dread? And so it really caught my attention, because not only did I recognize that in the people that I was working with, but I'd experienced that as well at times. And I little did I know the impact that it would have on me, not just professionally and with the work I was doing, but personally as well. And I started buying it and giving it to everybody I know. I love buying books and giving them to people, and so we developed our own little group of people that had read it and enjoyed it. And I started doing some work with it with some of the students that I was working with. But I also I don't remember if your email was in the book. But that was the audacious thing for me. I mean, I'm not a groupie like that, but I just wrote out because the book I wrote you an email because it had impacted me, never thinking I would hear from you. And I heard right back from you. And to me, that's how it started.
So let me just interject something there. Thank you for that. When in the introduction to this conversation, I was talking about the friends that I've made over the years. This is something that I started doing right away, and I've recommended to everybody that I can, whether they're in the entertainment business, or they write books, or they're a senior executive at their company. What I started doing is that when I got an email from somebody who was responding about their experience of reading the book, I remember I did get a comment from somebody once that says, "I'm just writing to tell you that your book is shit." He said, "Not the content. The content was fine." He said, "But the book itself fell apart." So I called the publisher and they gave him a new book. But anyway,
mine held up for years, and it's seen some battles.
So my point is that I responded. At the very least, I would respond with an email,
Right.
and whenever possible, if they left me, if their phone number was in the signature or whatever, I would pick up the phone and call them, which really blows people's minds. So that's the advice that I give people: is when you hear from somebody, if you're an executive at a company and one of your employees has the guts to send you an email for whatever reason, whether it's to complain or just to say hi or just to inform, whatever it is, if you can, pick up the phone and call them back at the very least. And it's something that they will never forget. And for us, this is where it started, right? And this was probably what year would that have been?
It wasn't too long after the book came out. I don't think I realized that at the time. 2005, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
So then you and I connected, and then, as I recall, you interviewed me for a magazine of some sort, but there was a point where. So I want people to understand this, because it's in the context of the training and development industry, as we used to call it back in those days. There is this attitude about intellectual property. Right, rightfully so in some contexts, that says, you need to, when an author writes a book and there's some application of that book, that the author needs to be involved in it. The way I remember the story, Steve, you started teaching the radical leap in a workshop of your own design before you and I had ever even met.
Yeah.
So I'm remembering that right.
So, I mean, and I worked in higher ed where intellectual property and appropriate citations are critical.
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, I mean, I always acknowledged gave you credit, usually bought books to give out with it, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I thought it was just what I was looking for, especially with principle-based organizations.
Right.
And you all have creeds, you all have, just like companies. I mean, it's informed the work that I continue to do, but as opposed to a mission or a vision, which a lot of those organizations have too, they all have creeds, what we believe. And I was actually working for, as I was leaving higher ed, I took a job at Starbucks. I was using it there. I literally took a job as a barista, and then they made me a learning coach and a coffee master. I ate it up. But I was an extreme leader barista, and so they were talking to me about moving to Seattle and working for them. I got to do extreme leadership for all the regional directors at one point, but that was my transition job. And then one of the sororities actually hired me to do leadership development for them and apply this. And it was, I'm going to give her a shout out, Cindy Menges, because I wasn't, she's like, I want you to write an article. I'm like, oh, I'm not really a writer. And she's, I think, is still the head of that organization. She's like, what if you could interview Steve Farber? And it hooked me. She knew just how to hook me. And that's what led to our next conversation, where I told you what I was doing with all of this.
So knowing people in this industry as I do, I will tell you that there are some that would have been taken aback by that, and the response would have been, "What do you mean you're teaching a workshop based on my book?" And that might have been what I said, but I didn't say it that way. The way I recall, if I said those words, it would have been like, "What do you mean? What do you mean you're doing a workshop based on my book?" Because I just thought that was the coolest thing, because I didn't have one. I was writing and I was doing keynote speeches. My background was in training. I mean, I've facilitated countless workshops, in my career, but I had never developed a workshop around the radical leap. And here you came along and you had one.
Well, I'll take it even further, Steve. You sent me some of this. Here, let me send you some of the slides that I use for the speeches that I give. So
I did.
You were very very open.
Yeah, that's I do remember that now that you mention it. So where that led us, and this is part of the story that I'd like people to understand, where that led us was, so now you came and shared that workshop with me, and we put our heads together and we said, okay, what can we do with this together? I mean, here's this great workshop, a workbook that you had designed, and a process and all that built around the radical leap. And I didn't have one, and you had done it, and you had expertise in facilitating this thing of your own design. It was my body of work. So it just seemed kind of obvious. Well, why don't we try doing this together? So for the very first time, we put together a program to train other people to teach that workshop and certify them to do it. And I think the first one we did was probably 2010, maybe even earlier than that. I don't know.
We piloted the workshop a few times with a couple of your companies that were really passionate, and that was great. And then we did the certifications.
I remember you just reminded me. I'm not gonna shit around here because I'm excited at the memory of it. We piloted that program a couple of different ways, and one way was I invited a bunch of my friends and colleagues from the Tom Peters Company, and you invited some of your friends and colleagues to LA to experience the pilot of this workshop.
I forgot about that.
And you facilitated it. I did not facilitate it. And I remember this. It was fantastic. And
talk about an OSM.
Yes, I remember that. So the OSM is the oh shit moment for the uninitiated among you. And I remember this because I actually kind of feel bad in part of my memory of this, because you were so nervous, and I, being a bit of a snarky fellow, I was teasing you for being so nervous. It's like, what are you nervous about? Are you nervous? Hey, Steve, are you nervous? And I remember one point you looked at me, you said, yes. And I went, oh shit. I think I might have not helped him right there. But then you facilitated, and it was brilliant, and it got us going. And now, just for the record, fast forward, we've got close to 200 certified facilitators in various parts of the world now.
That's awesome.
And we don't run those programs all that often, but once a year or so we do. And it all started with you, because you had the audacity to put it in motion because it meant something to you, and that means a lot to me.
Me too. I mean, it really shifted gears for me in a lot of different ways, and it, I've made a lot of friends through all of that work as well. And I mean, when you're talking about something that's really, the subtitle of the book is a personal lesson in extreme leadership. I mean, when you get into exploring with each other and sharing, you just inevitably build relationships with people, and that's exciting.
So you then went on to you did some independent work with the auto industry, facilitating around, not just around the radical leap, but all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, your skill set is pretty broad. So what are some of the elements in that for you?
Yeah, I actually, the Starbucks, the working for the sorority, doing their leadership development, which I just got to say, getting to work specifically with women was also just such a great opportunity. And I learned a lot, and it really, enhanced my skills as a facilitator and just understanding audiences. And then I was also a contract consultant in the auto industry doing teaching lean technology. If you think back to like mid 2000s, when things were not going so well in Detroit, that's when they brought us in to basically teach the Japanese model. Of course, you would never go into a UAW plant and talk about anything being good about the Japanese model. So I think we called it smart training at the time, but it was lean training, and it was my, despite everything, it was I call it my facilitation boot camp. And again, getting to work just with women and just with men, because inevitably fraternities and sororities, are single sex organizations. Understanding the union company dynamic and some of those things that have played out far beyond, in most manufacturing companies, pharma and others, there's that dynamic as well that, it's just good to understand. But yeah, my background was really all sorts of soft skills, and then, culture, change management, I mean, now I would say I personally like that. I think I'm a pretty holistic I have a very holistic approach just because of my experience.
Right.
So some people like you say, oh, you do change management. Well, I do, but I also do leadership development and coaching and strategic planning. And all of that kind of fits together in the organization, and you want that to all work together. I don't necessarily lead it all in the work that I'm doing now, but it's all infused because of the background that I've had.
So to have that exposure to these different kind of social dynamics, all men, all women, union environment, different industries, then you start to get a sense of what the differences are, but also what's universally true no matter what.
Yeah, and we had historically African American organizations, so getting to work with even some of the cultural organizations. I mean, all of that, I think, has, I'm so thankful for those experiences when I am facilitating, because I think it raises my awareness, and a facilitation, facil is to ease, to make easier, whether that's learning or even in the challenging that we're providing with the learning, and being able to just connect with people and maybe bring a level of understanding with some of the dynamics that may exist is, I kind of enjoy that, even because I know I'm getting a little bit deeper.
So I never made that connection before. So facile comes from the same root.
Yep.
It sounds like.
I'm taking French. Facilement is, to ease, right? So
Interesting.
yeah.
So that is interesting, because to facilitate, facilitation is a word that we use to describe somebody that's running a meeting. But to run it in such a way where there's such ease that people can say what's on their mind, and they can learn more easily, and they can share their
Right.
ideas with each other. I'm just curious though, what if you had to characterize, at the risk of overgeneralizing, but if you had to characterize the difference between men and women, in particularly as far as leadership goes, did you notice a difference in terms of facility, and ease of application, or is there not?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
I know.
I mean, honest. So, I can tell you from the learning that I had. My master's degree is in adult learning theory and development, and young adult, and what we know, or what we surmised, and what I experienced, working with college students is, developmentally, men and women kind of catch up with each other as they get older. But when they're young adults, the women tend to be much more morally developed,
Hmm.
maybe even psychosocially developed than their male counterparts. Plus, with all due respect, to my colleagues, who did everything they could against it, the American education system is often targeted towards men. And it's like, if all the women, or if every student raises their hand, there's this pressure on the teacher to call on the male student who's got his hands up, because they don't do it as often. And so we want to encourage that. And so I spent a lot of time empowering women, or trying to, and I think they would tell you that. And like, why do you why do you back down? Quite frankly, you've got the men around your little finger right now. And I, without saying it in so many words, and maybe I did, but I think, and I just think that there are social, just even continually, culturally, maybe is a better way to put it. There are things that to this day women leaders still bring. I had another friend who has written a couple books, and they've been targeted at women. And I bring my women clients together. I buy her book, I give it to everybody, and then she facilitates a discussion. And it is powerful for me to just sit back, and I wouldn't call myself even the facilitator. I'm just the host of the meeting, and to just watch the way women talk to each other when they've never met each other, and their openness and willingness to support that. We make it harder for men to do that still. And so those are all things that I think, because of my experience, I get to bring to the table.
Yeah. So there's it is a loaded question. It's one that I've actually talked with Tom Peters about on one of my podcast episodes, with the Love Is Just Damn Good Business podcast. And there seems to be, when you look at the research, you look at Kouzes and Posner's research, for example, around the leadership challenge, men and women tend to score on their leadership practices inventory, tend to score fairly even, but women tend to excel over the men in one particular practice, which they call encouraging the heart.
Yep.
Which is recognition, celebration, that kind of a thing. So if you take all of those elements, and they're all even, but women tend to excel in that one area, the conclusion is that overall women tend to be more effective leaders than men, and particularly, where I'm most interested about that, in that is in a business context, right? In a corporate context, because we're seeing more and more women in higher positions, which is a wonderful thing, and there's a lot more to go.
Well, if I could, I would just say too, all other things being equal, I mean, men and women challenge the process in different ways, and are even allowed to challenge the process in different ways. If a woman challenges the process in some of the ways that are perfectly acceptable for men, she's not called very nice things.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and so how do you provide support and encouragement, not just to that person, but also acceptance and understanding and broaden that other person's perspective. That's all part of the work that needs to be done right. I think Kouzes and Posner have even recently like updated some of their language to just make it all the more accepting for everybody, which is great.
Yeah, that's right. And the most recent version of their assessment tool, leadership practice inventory. You know, it's interesting because when I think about cultural differences, it's a question that I get asked quite a bit. As you know, I go to various parts of the world and give presentations to different cultures. You know, is LEAP, love, energy, audacity, and proof? Is it a kind of essentially an American model? And in my experience, the answer to that is no. It's universal, and I know this because you know I've delivered this message to literally thousands of people from all over the world. I think Barry Rassin and I talked about this.
You did. I listened to that one.
Yeah, in when he was the president of Rotary International. So multiculturally, you see it play out, but it might look different, right? So it's that cultural expression. So when you say that women challenge the process differently from men, those kind of differences are also true in kind of traditional cultures and country cultures around the world. So we might all recognize love, and we all do as humans. We recognize love, but the way that we recognize and how we express it could be very different from place to place, and very different from company to company, for that matter.
You know what I took from that conversation with Barry, and again, this goes back to my early experiences where every student organization I talked with talked about love or brotherhood or sisterhood or fidelity, or there were all these different words that ultimately were getting around the same thing. And here in America, for sure, and maybe more Western culture, we really we're not very good at defining love. We tend to think of it in like the sexualized way, especially at least when you apply it to corporate, like you can't say love. But love has so many different definitions. And certainly there are some cultures that are so much better at that. I know you and I talked once after you went, I think it was somewhere in the Middle East, and just talked about how embraced it was. And I always think about that because pardon the pun, but I love exploring love and even getting people to be comfortable using that term. So you don't need to force it down people's throat. We can just talk about what's important.
Right.
Or what are you passionate about or whatever. But, you don't love your grandparents the same way you love your wife.
Right.
Or your child or your dog. So, I mean, and sometimes it's literally pulling that into the conversation. Like,
yeah. And, I'm always reluctant to define love, which I'm asked to do. So, talking about how important love is in business. Well, what do you mean by love? I said, well, do you know it when you see it? Do you know it when you experience it? Do I really have to define it? I mean, if my wife, if Veronica came to me and said, honey, do you love me? And I said to her, define love. That's not gonna go very well for me. Right.
Not with her.
So it's, there's an opportunity to experiment with it a little bit and acknowledge that there's a lot of baggage associated with it. But the bottom line is, when you experience it, and people that love their work do better work. I mean, it's really that simple. So can you create a culture that people love being a part of? And you've experienced different cultures, not just in your consulting work, but then you went to your first foray into the entertainment world was at Warner Brothers, right? So talk a little bit about that experience to whatever you're able.
Well, that was another OSM for me. I knew I was ready to leave higher ed. I thought that I wanted to jump right into leadership development. I knew some people that had transitioned and were working for Disney and some other companies. And the irony is I wound up interviewing with Disney at the time and some other places. I also knew I wanted to move out west. But I took a job at Warner Brothers where I was implementing SAP, the system across their supply chain and their home entertainment division. No experience whatsoever. Was reading an SAP for Dummies book on my flight out. But what they really wanted me for was really the executive, my comfort level with executives dealing with change management and their role as sponsors of the project. And then they taught me everything else I needed to know. And, you know, that came from working in higher ed, where when one of the organizations I worked with would get in trouble, and I'd have to go to the board. When you work at Northwestern University, and unfortunately, you know, one of the fraternities has a formal at Shed Aquarium, and one of the dates gets sick and in the beluga whale tank. You know, I'm standing before the board, which is made up of presidents and lawyers and
Just
all these
another
people,
way to feed the whales,
including people that are on the Shed Aquarium board. And, you know, and it was my organization then. And, you know, but so talking to just one or two executives was kind of easy for me by the time I got out here, you know, and you were also dealing with parents who were all, you know, usually pretty successful. And so, you know, that was a skill that I brought with me. And in the process, I got to pick up some great skills around systems implementation, which we wound up doing globally. So, you know, I again, just great luck in that I didn't have to do that too long. They created an org development function that did not exist at Warner Brothers. It started not too long after me. They were doing some reorg. A leader, the vice president, who I loved at another company that I had been interviewing with, wound up coming in and leading that, and he pulled me over. Great mentor to me to this day, and you know, I got to help be a part of establishing that, and really doing, you know, everything from acquisition to leadership development. You know what, you know, all that work associated with organization development, org design, change management, all of that.
and then from there to Disney, right?
Then to Disney, to their consumer products division, where we really focused on leadership development. You came in. I should point out at Warner Brothers, one of the highlights, and again, kind of a daunting experience, was not really a part of my job, but I wound up working with the whole TV leadership team, and you know, facilitating a leap workshop for them, and they just ate it up. And this was like some of the top executives at the company, and I was still pretty new. So you know, somehow maybe you're teasing me, set me up to be really comfortable, you know, and recognize that feeling and that I was going to be okay. But you know, I've sort of taken it with me everywhere, to the point that when I went to Disney, we actually were able to get you to come in and do some work with I think I was facilitating or developing and coordinating a leadership day for anybody affiliated with HR for the consumer products division.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I remember that gig.
But I think the cool thing about all of that is getting, again, not just doing events like that, but like applying it and finding that no matter what the work I did, it was connecting it to, you know, purpose, and you know, it just sort of infused in me. And I think I was already doing it to a certain degree, but then you gave me a framework for it, and then that just made it sharpen even more. So that's what I take from all that.
So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is going to be I can guarantee folks a common thread through a lot of these conversations in this series is there's something about the LEAP framework that when people connect with it, it's because to a very large degree, it's a confirmation of who they already are, right? It's not like one day I'm an asshole and then I read this book and suddenly I think love is important in business. It's not, it doesn't typically work. I mean, I suppose it's not impossible, but when you say it just gave you a framework for what you were already what you already valued and what you were already doing, it just kind of enabled you to step up and be more intentional about it. Maybe.
Look, I can't tell you how many times, and at every level, with students, with, you know, and then sometimes their alumni or alumni would attend and they would, oh, can you come and do that for my organization? And so it would sort of have this ripple, right? Changing the world in bigger W ways every time. But I've done it for every, you know, as you know, every type of group, you know, business people, volunteers, people that work in civic organizations, nuns, and that's a fun one. And inevitably, they all say to me, "Wow, it's like Steve Farber wrote this for us or for me." And so hats off to you. I mean, it really is a personal lesson, and I know it's your lesson too. But that was my experience, and I was telling you earlier, like I was a bit daunted by doing this. And and so just thinking about coming back and talking to you and like, why would you want to talk to me? And I had to remind myself, I found myself going back to just some basic things about we all change the world differently and at different levels. And, a leader's greatest obligation is to make possible an environment where people can aspire to change the world. So much of what I think I'm proud of in the work that I've done is being able to inspire other people and hearing their stories, and that inspires me to go out and do more and to use their stories. So there's a real cyclical kind of maybe it's frequency.
Well, so yes, there is all of that, and there's another element to this too, Steve, that I think I'm sure you recognize in yourself, but I'll be forthright in calling it out. It's one thing to be good at teaching a workshop. It's another thing to be good at teaching a workshop or facilitating a workshop in large part because you're modeling what it is that you're teaching, because you're embodying what you're asking other people to consider and do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the people and the relationships that you've created over your career and the people that you've influenced and that you've inspired, starting back in your higher ed days, that's your legacy. That's the testament to your effectiveness over and above the body of work that you're teaching. It's your body of work. It's your life's work. It's the way that you show up in the world, and the way you support people, and the way that you coach people, and the way that you encourage people. It makes me proud to know that you're, when you're sharing my body of work with people, it's really because you're sharing your body of work with people.
Yeah, that is both humbling and I mean, it's incredibly humbling, but it's also inspiring. And I think what I try to do, when somebody shares that with you, is you turn that into like, what's next? What do I do with this now? Because it's proof, and it's that's important that you act on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be really easy just to sit back here and be like, oh, thank you, Steve. Thank you. But the truth is, I mean, it's an awesome feeling. And that's energy to go out and do something more with it.
Yeah. And it's my hope that, I mean, that's what I would love for all leaders to do. Which I know is an impossible standard whenever you say all about anything. But, when I was first thinking about even writing a book, not even thinking about writing The Radical Leap, but hadn't even conceived of it yet. The question that I asked myself was, if I could, based on my experience that I'd had working with all these different companies, if I could get every leader to do whatever I told them to do, or to have whatever perspective I wanted them to have, if I had that kind of power, if I had that magic wand, what would I have them do? Or what would I have them get and understand? And it was in trying to answer that question that this framework emerged. So it's an impossible standard to say all, as in all leaders should, however you complete that sentence. But I think it's a good challenge to have, right? It's a good thing to aspire to, even if it might be impossible. And if there was something that I could get all people to understand right now, it's that the way that they show up, their actions, what they do in the world every day speaks loudest about who they really are. And if you want somebody else, if you want to inspire somebody, if you want them to do something, be the example of it. As Kouzes and Posner called it, modeling the way. They call it Dwizzywid, do what you say you will do. I call it providing proof through your own actions, whatever it is. But again, that's what I'm trying to say about you. That's what you've done, and you take that with you to all of your clients.
Yeah, I think again, thank you. I think the other thing that I find myself coming back to in the book is just the whole concept of posers. And I think, like so many people, I was one of those people who, they're a poser. And, and therefore I can write them off, or I can react this way. And what I've learned over time, especially as an executive, when I do executive coaching or any kind of coaching, or just the other day, I was facilitating focus groups for one of my clients for their employee survey, and just trying to get some information. So again, facilitating is that ability to meet that person where they are and to find some compassion, whether it's a poser, and it starts with, I've been a poser before, right? And meeting and recognizing that it's not just about love, but it's also about fear. And especially in the work I do around change management, so much of that, you don't start by talking about what you love. In order to really get them to buy in, you have to understand what it is that they fear and make sure that you let them know you're going to help them find ways to alleviate that or address that. And so in a perfect world, and quite frankly, as a consultant, I don't know that it would be such a perfect world, because I wouldn't have anything to do. But if every leader were right there, and you've had some people say, hey, I want to work with you and I want to embrace this and bring this in fully, that's great. But a lot of times the way I do it is in a much more subtle format. And, I'm really proud of the company. One of the companies that I'm working with right now, there's just been doing some amazing things in the med tech industry. And the work, I've been with them for 7 years, and it really started, I do their strategy work. And it was all about aligning it with what is your mission and vision.
Right.
At the very top, and then if everything else flows, people will find a way, no matter, even if they're mopping the floors, in the facilities department, of connecting to the purpose of the organization.
Right.
And Mizuho OSI, I'm going to give them a shout out, but they're very close to having a huge product launch, and it made me so proud when I got to attend their product launch a few weeks ago, because they told the story, which included the mistakes, the scars. They showed their scars along the way of, this one didn't work, but here's what we took from it, and here's what we've got now. And it was creating all this really great energy. Their mission is to improve outcomes for people undergoing surgery. That's it. Right. Yeah. And then their vision talks about incorporating excellence, innovation, and working with the customers. Their customers aren't, you actually are a customer's customer.
So I just recently had a new hip put in. The old one was taken out too at the same time, by the way. It wasn't just like I have 3 hips now. Yes, a hip replacement on their table. And I got wheeled into the surgery room. I said to the surgeon, I said, hey, what kind of table is that? He goes, it's our surgery table. I said, yeah, but who makes it? He says, Mizuho, this the name of the company. I said, I know a guy works with them. It was pretty funny.
You were telling me you were going to have the surgery, and I'm like, are you having the anterior approach? Yeah. How do you know that? Are you going to do it on a Mizuho Hana table? Yeah. So you can tell I get passionate, but my point is, at the end of all of it, like after they got everybody so excited, their leaders got right back up there and said, here's our mission. Here's our vision. Here's our mission. Here's our vision. How are we doing? And it was, I call that line of sight.
Yeah.
And being able to connect it at all levels. I've talked to some of the people about the LEAP model, but it just infuses the work I do with them in very different ways.
So it's like a for you, that LEAP framework, that LEAP model it's like kind of an operating system running in the background. You're not always overtly teaching it, but it informs whatever you do, just like it does for me. I'm not, all leap all day, all the time with every one of my executive coaching meetings and all the things that I do. It's not leap, 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 leap out here. Everybody understands it, but it's operating back here so that everything that I'm doing is helping people to apply it, whether we're overtly hammering on it or not. Which is why I think, the work that you and I are looking to do together going forward is going to be really powerful, because you have, for example, your work around strategic planning. So when I have a client that says, hey, we want to make LEAP part of our culture. We want to operationalize love in the way that we do business. Well, that looks very different, from company to company, but essentially the filter that we have to put everything through is, what should love look like in the way that we do business, right? And that touches everything from the kind of people that we hire, how we hire them, the way we run meetings, the way we generate ideas, our comp and benefits, our everything. So ideally, you're putting everything through that filter, including, for example, strategic planning. Mm-hmm. So what is it you're trying to accomplish? How are you going to get there? Taking people through a strategic planning process is not my forte. I know how important it is. It's just not in my wheelhouse, but it is in your wheelhouse. And what's so powerful about that is you could take people through that process, and at the same time, by virtue of doing that, you're helping them to apply LEAP you're getting it into their DNA, right? And into the future vision of the company, or the realization of that future vision of the company. And that's what makes this, or any powerful model of leading or being. That's what makes it powerful, is that you can apply it to anything, no matter what it is that you're trying to do. If you can cultivate love for it, generate energy around it, inspire people to be audacious in the pursuit of it, and prove that you're making progress, you got a better chance of getting it done.
Yeah. Change management, strategic planning, both of those are, whether they wanted it or not, they'd probably be getting it from me, because it's just inherent in my operating system, like you say. But certainly if they want to amp it up a bit, that's awesome too. And really embrace it as part of their culture. That would be awesome.
So as we're coming in for a landing here, first of all, thank you, Steve. It's your story is important. You said something earlier about, we were talking a little bit before we hit the go live button about, geez, why did you ask me on this show? You just had Barry Rassin talking about how Rotary helped to eliminate polio in the world. What have I done? Well, the fact of the matter is that, the focus on the small W world, mm-hmm. the world of your clients, the world of your students back in the day, that's the journey that we're all on. And there are very few of us that have an opportunity to do our version of eradicating polio, to have our version of changing the very fabric of human existence. But every one of us has an opportunity to change the small W world around us. And if we're not at least attempting to do that, first of all, I think we're taking up space on this planet. And we certainly don't have the right to call ourselves leaders if we're not, let alone extreme leaders, if we're not trying to change at least our piece of the world for the better.
Well, I'm sure if the conversation, this was part of me getting comfortable with doing this after listening to your conversation with Barry. I'm sure if you would have had the opportunity to talk to Barry, he would have given you a million examples of where he developed his confidence to just even take that on through much smaller W's. And so, it's all important. It's all important. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for being a great model for all of us. And folks, thank you for tuning in. Again, don't forget to go to the radicalleap.org, download your copy of the free audio book version of the book that we've said a little bit about here today. And again, Steve, thank you so much, my friend. It's great to have you here. Hang out for a couple of minutes in the virtual green room. And folks, thank you for tuning in. See you next time on the Leap Hour.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining me on the Leap Hour. Hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share the heck out of this thing. Also, don't forget to get your free copy of the Radical Leap audio at radicalleap.org. We'll see you next time on the Leap Hour.